So over the last few days, I've been spending a fair bit of time with Back 4 Blood's beta, the upcoming co-op shooter created by Left 4 Dead devs Turtle Rock Studios. Though I think that might be a bit misleading to say because I don't think any of that original dev team are even still involved. Either way though, this thing's being pushed out as a Left 4 Dead spiritual successor, though in most ways it actually regresses more than it progresses. And I think it's the video game equivalent of when you copy your mate's homework because you didn't want to do it yourself and you just changed the handwriting. It's a first-person horde shooter, only instead of it being a strain of a flu virus that's turned people into zombie-like creatures, this time it's a mysterious parasite that's turned people into zombie-like creatures, called the Ridden. But the general gist is still the same. Former humans chase after you at high speed, snarling and flailing their arms around as they try to take you out. With 3 other people, you've got to do your best to survive and complete your objective, getting a bit of a brief respite in safe rooms in between each level. Instead of playing as a ragtag group of civilians, now you're playing as the Cleaners.
I'm the cleaner.
People again immune to the virus and doing their best to reclaim what's left of civilization. Basically what's going to happen in Australia at the end of the year when we're all going to be let out of stage 4 lockdown. Now, I know that this is still a beta, so you can't expect it to be perfect when it comes to glitches and bugs. And I'm not really going to focus on that stuff. I mean, it's like going to the mechanic when he's servicing your car and asking him why the bonnet's up. But more than that is that I didn't really see any major problems on that front to begin with. The game ran pretty smoothly, I didn't get disconnected from matches, I could join my friends' games easily, and outside of some wonky AI and being launched up into the goddamn stratosphere at one point, the game seemed to run fine, so that's not what this video is about. What it's really about, and the biggest takeaway that I got from Back 4 Blood, is that it is just so incredibly boring. And I just don't think that's going to change all that much between now and when this thing gets released in October. That's if it doesn't get delayed for another couple of months, though maybe a delay might give them a fair bit more time to sort out some of the other issues that people are having with this game. Yeah, yikes. Playing through the single player content for the first time in the beta took me about 90 minutes, but it may as well have been 90 hours, because I lost all sense of time when I was playing this and just went into autopilot mode. Shooting the same enemies over and over with an assault rifle or an SMG as I walk through these unremarkable looking environments to get to the next loading screen.
Oh, that's nasty!
And I can't think of any other time I've played something that's clearly had so much money put into it, but that's also just been so boring. Before I jump right into this thing, I do want to take a quick moment to thank my sponsor Steelseries, and if nothing else, being able to play through this with some really handy gaming peripherals did make the experience a lot better. Steelseries make the best gaming mice, keyboards, pads, and headphones, and it might not seem like a big thing, but the gear you're playing with can make a huge impact on how well you do. With the Arctis Pro headset, for instance, I'm able to control the volume of the game with one dial and then the volume of the voice chat with the other to make sure they're not drowning each other out. And that's really important in online gaming, especially in things like Back 4 Blood's Versus mode, where voice chat is absolutely pivotal.
Oh, chuck it, G-Man. You got a full belly there, buddy.
So if you're thinking it's time for an upgrade, head on over to steelseries.com and use the promo code GMAN at checkout to get 12% off. Back 4 Blood's going to get a lot of comparisons here to Left 4 Dead, and that's perfectly justified in my opinion, but that's also going to be to its detriment, because there's just so many things this game does worse than its almost 12-year-old predecessor. On a positive note, Back 4 Blood is actually kind of good in the way that the characters you choose to play as have different passive buffs, and you should really be playing to that character's strengths and trying to help out your team. So it's more of a tactical and strategic choice than it is just a cosmetic one. People aren't just going to be picking someone because they like the way their hat looks or the funny things they say. The character named Mum, for instance, gives everyone on the team an extra life, so they can be down an extra time before being killed.
I mean, we're not keeping score here, right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Whereas the John Goodman clone Hoffman increases the amount of ammo that everyone can carry. On that note too, it seems that there's much more of a focus on ammo conservation here. Compared to Left 4 Dead, where ammunition was a bit of a one-size-fits-all deal, now it's broken down into different categories, so it almost doesn't make sense for every single person on the team to be running around with shotguns, considering that means you're all going to be fighting for the spare shotgun shells. And that's a good thing, because 4 people rocking out the AA-12s in this could probably single-handedly turn the tide of the entire infection. I mean, seriously, that gun is so overpowered. There's definitely a feeling of these characters being over-designed though, if that makes sense. Like Carly, for instance, with the I get offended by everything haircut, the tattoos, the jewelry, and a coordinated leather outfit. It just feels so out of place to me in a world that's really gone down the crapper, and it's kind of unrealistic that someone would look so prim and presentable with an outfit that's clearly had way too much time put into it. Or look at Holly, for instance, running around with her jumper tied around her waist, which, yeah, okay, that looks fashionable, but it doesn't seem to be very practical. Plus, it seems like the kind of thing that a grab-happy zombie would be likely to latch onto. Characters like Walker and Hoffman seem more realistic, but these others, they just kinda look like Fortnite characters. And they've definitely been designed more for flair than functionality. Do you remember in Left 4 Dead, for instance, how Louis was still in his office attire? Half of his shirt was untucked, his pants were all messed up, and his tie wasn't even on properly. Now, I get that these guys are supposed to be special zombie hunters, prepped for going out into the wilderness and carrying out these important assignments, but there's definitely a sense of their designs feeling out of touch with the state of the world.
Yeah, let's pick it up.
But then, I mean, in the same game where these people are making cringe-worthy wisecracks half the time, well, maybe such an impractical outfit makes more sense than I'm giving it credit for.
This is what I'm here for.
I guess my point is that I'm more likely to relate to realistic characters as opposed to cartoon ones. The most interesting new system that Back 4 Blood incorporates, though, are the cards, and this is something that's going to become essential for beating this thing on the high difficulties. Right, so the whole point of the game is to play through all of these main acts, and each time you finish one of the levels, of which there's upwards of half a dozen, you earn supply points. Then you spend these supply points back at your camp on buying cards and unlocking new decks. Or as they say in New Zealand, unlocking new dicks. Cards do a whole heap of things, from increasing your base health points, making reloads faster, to increasing the amount of ammo you can carry. At the base, you can create your own custom deck, almost like the loadouts in Call of Duty or something. Then, whatever the first card is in your deck, it's automatically equipped at the start of a run, and then each time you finish a level, you pick a single other card from your deck to add to your build. Savvy? Then the game also kind of throws cards back at the player with the corruption cards, randomly generated handicaps it puts on each run. Like fog to mask player visibility, you're putting alarms behind every single door. Yeah, that's fun. So I guess the idea here is that the further you get into a run, you pick these cards strategically, becoming really powerful and creating a really strong build. Which is all just so you can earn more supply points and then buy more cards. I mean, outside of the grind of just customizing your own deck, what's the end game here?
Did you do that on purpose?
I'd be really surprised if they don't end up just monetizing this aspect entirely, where they make it so you spend like $12 and you get 500 supply points or something. And honestly, that really wouldn't surprise me after what they did with Evolve, which I think still has to have some kind of record for being the most monetized game ever. Hard mode is actually genuinely hard here. The jump from normal to hard, for instance, feels more like the jump from normal to expert in Left 4 Dead, to the point that the devs are actually working on balancing this out. The brief time I attempted to play through this, we could barely make it out of the first couple of rooms, and I really think they need to add in a fourth difficulty mode so you've got like easy, normal, hard, and expert, as opposed to just rebalancing the hard mode. Trauma is a new mechanic they've added in here too, which is the more damage you take, the more it lowers your maximum health points. And then the only way to get this back to full is by using med stations found in locked rooms, and this is going to be a really spicy mechanic to deal with on that hard mode. One real piece of genuine praise that I can give here though is to the movement and the shooting, in the sense that it at least feels smooth to control. For a game where aiming, shooting, and mobility is really key, it's handy at least that this doesn't feel like cold shit. You can vault up ledges if they're not too high, and about the only thing that I wish it had was sliding and being able to vault through windows. Otherwise, running, sprinting, and jumping feels responsive, and aiming down sights and reload times can often be inhumanly fast.
Whoa!
Though the inclusion of aiming down sights also kinda does make it feel like any run-of-the-mill first-person shooter. It's also the most generic lineup of weapons too, and playing this, it just kind of reminded me a lot of playing Call of Duty Warzone. The way you'd find all these different weapons lying around in crates that all had different attachments on them, like stocks, ACOGs, and silencers.
Need this.
All of which make incremental upgrades to things like the damage or the accuracy of these guns. During combat, you've even got hit markers, and the way a character holds up their fists when they're unarmed looks the same as it does in Warzone 2. Obviously too, man, like we can't be doing all that bad in the apocalypse if there's assault rifles, automatic shotguns, and silencers in near perfect condition around every corner either.
Well, what do you know?
Instead of just finding guns lying around on the ground in Left 4 Dead, now you find them lying around on the ground in crates, along with that other roster of offensive and defensive items like medkits, pain pills, Molotov cocktails, and pipe bombs. Annoyingly too, you can't remove the attachments you've got for your current weapon, which is annoying because it's really the attachments that make or break how good a gun is. I don't think these are weapons pulled from asset libraries, but man, they really do feel like it. And it's just the same shit you've seen in every other first-person shooter. There's an MP5, there's a Vector, there's a Scar, there's a Beretta. You've used these guns 100 times. They've always looked the same and there's nothing to differentiate them.
Oh, sweet sanctuary!
In Left 4 Dead, the different weapon types had specific uses. The shotguns were great at clearing out the hordes, the snipers were great for the special infected, especially the smoker and the hunter, and the assault rifles were just good middle ground. This time though, there just doesn't really seem to be any significant difference between these weapons. I think that's also kind of the problem of making a game like this in 2021, where we're really getting to the point now where military and horde shooters have really been absolutely done to death. You know what I don't understand though, is how they can add all of this kind of stuff in, but then remove the most basic quality of life features. Like the shove attack from Left 4 Dead, one of the most useful moves you had and perfect at crowd controlling the zombies. Now instead of that, you've just got a basic melee attack which can only hit a single enemy.
Not today, motherfucker!
Even something as basic as not being able to have manual control over your flashlight. Like when did the simple convenience of being able to turn your flashlight on and off become an oversight? About the newest thing they've added in here is that if you scare a flock of birds, it somehow attracts the attention of the horde, which is kind of the same as the car alarms in Left 4 Dead. And I don't understand how this is supposed to work, unless they're supposed to be some kind of hive mind birds that all communicate to each other, but who knows. The sheer amount of times you scare these things without even trying is just countless.
Oh, give me a break.
Really annoys me too how it doesn't even show you the full stats at the end of each level or even the entire run. Part of the fun of finishing a Left 4 Dead campaign was seeing who had the most kills, or, seeing who friendly fired the most, which in my case was almost always me. Still though, like I said, the shooting does feel good, if nothing else. I really like shredding through enemies with the Vector, plus I appreciate how the revolver is so overpowered that it kills those standard ridden in a single hit. Unloading that AA-12 into a wall of approaching enemies is satisfying as all hell, and you've got to watch out for friendly fire a bit too, so it's not all completely mindless. But I reckon if you removed the UI from this thing and told someone to try to guess what game it was, well, they'd have a hell of a time picking it. Throughout the game, you're constantly on the lookout for copper. Why it's copper, I'm not too sure, but hey, that's the game's version of currency. Then at each safe room, you've got these cases where you can buy new weapons, ammo, and items from. Yes, someone was nice enough to leave these small cases lying around that are just jam-packed with every single item you'd ever possibly need. From weapons to weapon attachments through to toolkits that get you into locked rooms. This is also a really good example, I think, of how over-designed this game is. This barrage of icons and items to sift through, I mean, it takes a good minute or so of staring at this thing to process all of this information for the first time. All I can say is that I really miss those days of a minimalistic heads-up display. Seeing as this is a first-person shooter coming out in 2021, it also had to make sure it filled the requirement of running on the Unreal Engine 4. And one of the biggest problems you're going to have when making something run on the Unreal Engine 4 is that it's going to look a lot like every other game running on the Unreal Engine 4. Most notably during the bush and forest areas where it just looks like the same looking trees, grass and sun flares you've seen a dozen times before. This is another big part too where Back 4 Blood is lacking. I mean, there's just no flair to any of these environments. It's just generic looking trees, buildings, cars, and so forth. You could be somewhere in the Midwest of America, or you could be somewhere in Eastern Europe for all I know. There's just nothing striking or memorable about really any of the locations you visit in the beta. A lot of the sequences also just kind of feel like they're copied across from Left 4 Dead. I mean, that opening level in the beta reminded me a lot of the first part of No Mercy, and then the ending sequence reminded me a lot of the end of Blood Harvest, even down to an APC coming to pick you up. There's a section holding out in a church, which is kind of similar to Death Toll in Left 4 Dead 2. Then you're having to run across a demolished bridge, again similar to the final level in the parish. Despite the Ridden being host for an alien parasite as opposed to a virus, they're really still just your basic, standard cookie-cutter zombies. And I know you can't really expect much from zombies, they're just supposed to be fodder, and little more than a distraction for whenever these special Ridden show up. Only the special ones aren't really all that great either. Not to mention, they lack a lot of the subtle design touches from Left 4 Dead that made those infected so memorable. Remember in Left 4 Dead how when one of those special infected was around, you'd hear these very unique sound cues which gave them away before you even saw them. You'd hear the wheezing of the smoker, the growling of the hunter, or that Mountain Dew burp of the boomer, and get yourself prepared. The Witch was also another classic example, hearing her sobbing off in the distance and that music slowly building to a crescendo the closer you got. I mean, it was terrifying at the time. Witch! Well, Back 4 Blood has none of that. You just find yourself suddenly under attack by these special ridden without even knowing they were around. Surprise, motherfucker!
Need to reload.
Those short, quiet, tense moments in between fighting the next horde are just completely gone here too. And now it's just this constant, steady stream of enemies, removing any tension or atmosphere the game could have possibly had. You just go from one room to the next, shooting enemies the entire time with no real sense of pacing in between. The music in general is also just completely lacking. I mean, I've still got that victory song from the end of Left 4 Dead 2 stuck in my head to this day. But the ending music for Back 4 Blood, even after finishing it like 4 or 5 times now, I couldn't sing it back to you if you had a gun to my head. Even the animations for some of these special ridden attacks is just kinda lazy. Like when your character gets constricted by one of the hockers, they're just locked in place in the standing position, almost like they're T-posing without the T. And look, again, I hate to bring it back to Left 4 Dead, but I will. Compare it to when you grabbed by the smoker, for instance, or the way the hunter would pin you down and start ripping you to pieces. Like, it's the small things like that. The Reeker is Back 4 Blood's version of the Boomer. He's a giant fat asshole that vomits up bile and explodes when he's killed. The tall boy looks like something out of Resident Evil, lumbering around with a giant arm that makes me think that guy spends a lot of time home alone on his computer. Masturbation jokes, I love them. And this is about the most effort it seems they put into the animations, because this guy can outright pick players up and then jack them off to death. And then Back 4 Blood's version of the tank is the Ogre, a giant mini-boss that stomps around, and I think this thing kinda looks like what would happen if the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was made out of someone's butthole. But again, very minimal animation work outside of it just lumbering around and having a couple of different attacks.
I am so sorry.
So overall, I feel like these enemies are kinda boring and just not very memorable. I know they're supposed to be adding in more for the final build, and I'm just hoping these things are going to be more creative than the current lineup, because right now these guys are underwhelming and just disappointing.
Reloading.
Probably the most disappointing aspect in Back 4 Blood though is the gore, or the lack thereof. And I still don't understand, man, how a 12-year-old game like Left 4 Dead 2, running on an inferior engine, can still somehow look better here when it comes to the violence than a game made in 2021 does. That's not to say there's not going to be a high body count in Back 4 Blood though. You're going to be killing upwards of 1,000 ridden per run here, but the gore itself just feels so basic. About the best you're going to get here is a bunch of blood spatters when shooting things. One of the most underwhelming things is when you throw out a pipe bomb, which beeps like an alarm clock as it attracts all nearby enemies. And the explosion and the aftermath for this thing was so dreadful in comparison to Left 4 Dead's that I wanted to go and take a hot shower after it went off.
I don't like this.
The Molotov's also another lackluster weapon too.
Hoffman! I'll kill you if you do that again.
Fire in the hole! Reloading!
Reloading.
Contrast with this is the absurd amount of blood that gets on your character during combat, an almost laughable amount, which ironically ends up kind of looking bad, despite the technology and physics behind it probably being quite detailed. Now, if there was some kind of tactical advantage to this, like maybe when you're covered in blood or something, you'd be harder to spot by zombies, that would have been a cool idea. But that would require them to actually put some effort into things. And it's far easier to just make a game where all you do is shoot things the entire time. The second mode the game offers is the Versus mode, which is going to be very familiar to a lot of people who spent a bit of time with the Left 4 Dead back in the day. And I'd argue that's going to bring over a lot of those sweat lords as well, for a short period of time anyway. It's a pretty similar format. It's primarily PvP gameplay, where one team plays as the survivors and the other plays as the special ridden. The team that goes first has to survive for as long as possible, and then when they finally lose, the other team has to try to beat their time. And you do this for 3 rounds to decide who's the winner. And this mode's also got its own card decks to help customize the experience. Compared to the Versus maps in Left 4 Dead though, we could actually follow the other team around during the campaign and fuck with them. These are instead, for some reason, smaller arenas. with a battle royale style bubble that slowly shrinks in as time passes to make it easier for the attackers to win. On top of that, it's also in third person now when controlling the ridden instead of first person, which not only is that less interesting, not being able to see the world from their perspective, but it also allows you to cheese out the camera by being able to see where the enemy team is without being in their line of sight. And it's way too easy to just hang back on a roof somewhere and spit at people from the other side of the map before you can move in safely for the kill. They're really going to need to sort out the matchmaking for this mode too, because if you're at all decent at this and playing with other people over voice chat, you'll pretty much wipe the floor with the other team every single time. The first match I played in this mode, 2 people from the other team rage quit after we beat them in the first round, and then a third person left shortly after.
Yeah boys, the enemy team's left.
So it was just a 4v1 for the remainder of the match, and that's not really fun for anyone involved.
It's fucking stupid. It shouldn't happen like that.
I think the reason for this is that people would rather just quit out and start a new match than stick around and get their asses handed to them, which makes sense, but if that's going to be a thing, then they at least need to include bot support so that people willing to stick around don't get entirely screwed over. I think overall, Back 4 Blood will probably do pretty well in the short term because if nothing else, it does function okay as a shooter. But this is not going to be something people are going to be grinding out for years to come, and I can't see much point playing it after finishing the campaign, or after buggering around a bit with the versus mode.
Oh, come on.
The characters are forgettable, the special ridden are unremarkable, and the weapons and environments are just run-of-the-mill. The best way I could describe Back 4 Blood is that it's a video game. It's definitely a video game, of that much I'm certain. The one good thing that came out of Back 4 Blood's beta is that it made me want to go back and replay Left 4 Dead 2 with the boys. And if it does nothing else but introduce a few new fans to that old series, well, then I guess the whole thing won't be a total loss.
Last 2 standing. Let's make it count.
Gotcha, bitch.